All right, let's get right into it. If you know anything about French movies, you know this face. The wild energy, the crazy eyes, the shrieks. That's Louis de Funès. He was the absolute king of French comedy, a guy who could make the entire country roar with laughter. But what if the man making all those faces was a complete and total stranger?
Because that's the whole paradox we're unpacking here. On screen, he was just pure, unadulterated chaos, like a human cartoon. But in his real life, he was secretive, incredibly anxious, even paranoid, and obsessed with every little detail. The public clown was a private warrior, and if you really want to get his genius, you have to understand that split.
First things first, to really get the man, you have to appreciate just how big he was. We're not talking about just another successful actor. Nope. We're talking about a full-blown cultural phenomenon who basically owned the French box office for decades. Just try to wrap your head around this number for a second. $17 million. That's how many people in France bought a ticket for one movie, La Grande Vadrouille. To give you some perspective, that record wasn't broken for over 30 years, until Titanic came along. The man wasn't just popular, he was the French box office.
And it wasn't some one-hit wonder either. From the silly gendarme movies to the Fantomas thrillers, from Rabbi Jacob to Leil ou la Cuisse, he was an absolute machine, cranking out classic after classic. For a while there, his face was just everywhere you looked.
So you've got this picture of a comedy giant, right? Now let's start peeling back those layers. Let's meet the man who lived in a state of constant, gnawing fear.
This quote, man, it just hits the nail on the head. The guy who looks so unbelievably confident on camera was secretly haunted by this idea that it could all just vanish, that any day it could all collapse. This wasn't just being a professional, it was a deep, deep paranoia that never, ever let him go, even when he was the biggest star in the country.
So that begs the question, right? How does a man that tormented become the source of so much pure joy for millions of people? And maybe more importantly, what did it cost him to do it?
Well, the seeds of all that anxiety weren't a mystery. They were planted and watered over decades of total obscurity and failure. You see, his success didn't come easy, and it sure didn't come early.
Just picture this journey. For almost 20 years, which is an eternity in show business,
He showed up in more than 80 different movies, a lot of the time just for a few seconds.
And after all that hustling, the public had absolutely no clue who he was. He was just a face in the background, an uncredited extra, the guy who says one line and disappears.
He started out playing piano in dive bars. He didn't even go to acting school until he was 31. Then, he spent the next 2 decades as a total nobody. People thought he was too short, too weird-looking, too nervous. He was in his late 40s when he finally got his first real lead role, an age when a lot of actors are already thinking about retirement. That long, hard climb never, ever left his mind. So when fame finally slammed into his life, it wasn't some big, happy party. For him, it was a war zone, and he was going to defend every single inch of territory he'd fought so hard to win. That struggle turned him into what the French call a redoutable négociateur, basically a ferocious, intractable negotiator. And this wasn't about ego, not at all. It was a defense mechanism. After being powerless for 20 years, he swore he would never, ever be at someone else's mercy again. And he was strategic about it, almost like a general. He had to have the final say on the script. He controlled his own shooting schedule to manage his health. He went over every single contract, every financial statement. Every clause was another brick in the fortress he was building around his career, all to protect himself from ever being poor again. And that obsession, it wasn't just business. It bled into every part of his life. Here's the biggest star in France, and he's living a quiet, modest life, growing his own vegetables. He checked every single bill. He even kept old costumes from his movies. This wasn't a rich guy being greedy. This was the behavior of a man who, in his heart, never stopped feeling poor. For him, money wasn't a luxury. It was a life raft. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Because once you understand the man behind the mask, his movies, they completely change. You start to realize he was taking his own personal demons and putting them right up there on the screen for everyone to see. Let's look at his version of l'Avare, the miser. On the surface, it's this hilarious movie about a cheap old man. But look a little closer. It's really about a paranoid father
whose obsession with money completely isolates him, drives his own kids away, and leaves him pathetic and alone with his gold. Does that sound familiar? He was basically playing out his own life, just with a laugh track.
Or take a later movie, La Soupe aux Choux. It's about these two old-timers who feel rejected and ridiculed by the modern world. Their only way out? They get whisked away by aliens, which is a pretty clear metaphor for death. De Funès himself was getting older, he was exhausted by being famous, he had serious heart problems, he was playing out his own feelings of being left behind, of retreating into the solitude of his garden.
You know, it reminds me of that line from the philosopher Nietzsche. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. That was Louis de Funès to a T. The dancing star we all saw on screen was born directly from the chaos he felt inside. His comedic genius wasn't in spite of his anxiety, it was fueled by it.
So what's the big takeaway here? You know, think about the class clown from your school. The one person who could just light up a room and make everybody die laughing. But you always had a feeling that when they went home, things were a lot quieter, maybe even a little lonely. Louis de Funès was that person, but on the scale of an entire country. He sacrificed his own peace of mind, and probably his health, so that millions of people could be happy. He managed to turn his private pain into our public laughter.